to be stronger.
Hold on. Damn it. I wasn't recording. What the fuck was this? This is what I'm talking about.
Slavery. Egypt built off slavery. Greece built off slavery.
All right, we're here at Plutocracy now. We're talking about the free market and slavery.
All right, do we want to go ahead and do this? I feel
yes, no, we're doing it. We're doing it. All right.
I don't want to do it because it's going to be rushed.
Shut the fuck. You guys are doing it. You guys are doing it. We are doing it.
We need to do it. We need to do it another time. We have to do it another time.
All right, we're talking about the free market and slavery. We can do it another time, too.
All right, fuck it. All right.
Where were you guys? Because you guys...
But a part of what you're saying right now is that most ancient civilizations at one point had slavery, and that's accurate. But there's also a lot of successful places today that never had slavery. Canada, for instance, never had slavery. Japan, during its era of economic growth and boom.
But they do have imports from places that...
slavery.
Not during their economic boom period.
Which period are you talking about?
They've been an economic boom for the last 5,000 years, Joey.
Japan enslaved Koreans and Chinese for their industry.
Ants enslave each other, man. Ants, fucking ants enslave each other.
But you could still look at places like Canada and New Zealand.
Here's the thing. New Zealand
natural free market incentive.
They employed genocide in New Zealand.
This is the thing. Australia was a penal colony, so they were all prisoners anyway. This is the thing. This is the thing about the slavery thing.
But you do see how almost every ancient civilization has had slavery at some point.
Here is the thing. You're correct. I don't know if you're
ancient. What about ours? Who's building the next fucking World Cup stadium?
Qataris. Anyway, you migrant laborers. You were saying
probably not from Qatar.
Yeah, not from Qatar. They're from India.
Probably get it imported from.
You were saying that there were societies that have had economic freedom, able to pursue their dreams, that have been able to be successful along with slave home societies.
Yes.
Here's the thing. Economically, looking at economics alone, slavery and general, authoritarianism, dictatorship, whatever you want to call it, be it the central planning or just a plantation slavery like they had in the American South, is an effective economic system, but it is not an effective social system.
Corporate plutocracy.
Because you're keeping so many people in bondage that you're creating a lot of resentment, you're creating economic inequality.
Put all that...
Well, I do find it concerning that you believe those things. Bridgman brought up earlier feudalism, but I should point out, if you look at the countries in Europe that became powerful at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, they were actually the countries that got rid of feudalism. Places like the Netherlands or Germany or Britain in particular.
It depends on their type.
I would point out that the evidence is very much so against you. But let me.
But the rise to power. They were only able to
the fundamental economic arrangement really changed.
It was Britain that had the Magna Carta.
It depends on their type of industry.
System of rights and freedoms.
But it depends. But it depends.
I'm going to get to the end of this sentence one way or another. Britain is the place that came up with a lot of the rights that we take for granted today.
For rich white people.
And then the United States took these rights, property rights and everything else.
For rich white people.
And expanded those things. Well, it should be noted that in the United States, these rights were given to white people and white people alone.
White men.
Well, who was it in the United States?
Who was it in the United States that was actually able to develop their skills and chase their talents and dreams and become strong intellectual?
The Irish were enslaved in England up until the mid-1800s.
Imagine for a moment if everybody had been given that kind of freedom to chase the fullness of their talents.
This is what matters.
It would have been a much better country if that had been the case.
There would have been less to go around. That's part of the problem. But this is the thing. This is the thing about a slave economy versus a pure capitalist market-based economy, is you have to look at the type of industry your country is engaged in. If you're an agricultural nation like the United States was to a large extent, slavery is an effective form of labor in an economics. It's more than ethically wrong, but it is effective. If you look at, for example, the British War, where you have a lot of naval trade and things, it's not as effective because you have to allow people more freedom. You can't keep them in the central area. You can't control them and confine them and beat them into submission in the same way. It really depends. But look, for example, at the German armaments industry during World War II, which primarily functioned off of slave labor. Most of the German, especially the men, were in the military, and it was the people that were in the concentration camps that were in large part producing the means for German war industry late in the war. And even during an intensive Allied bombing campaign in 1944, 1943, German output industrially for military things actually went up. And their primary source of labor from Albert Speer and these other people that were in charge of that was slave labor. It was
And I believe your initial argument
camps.
is to say that a lot of the economic success that we see in the United States has nothing to do with the foundation of slavery. And that's just simply false on its face, given that, for years you had...
Slaves built the White House.
Let me finish my point. For years you had plantation owners taking in large profits, building generational wealth, investing in banks, investing in businesses, and later on, some of that investment money transferred into the railroad and some of the infrastructure that went out west. So to say that, had there not been that slavery apparatus there, it gave us in the United States a head start over countries that didn't have that labor. Because we had so much free labor, if you have free labor, you can invest more in machinery. You can invest more in buying more seeds. You can invest more in infrastructure.
What he points out is one thing he points out as a key difference is that in American society, the people that had the slave labor, they invested and rolled their wealth forward.
Right.
Versus you saw in a place like Brazil that had legal slavery until I think 1881. They were one of the last countries to abolish it. The people that owned slaves there, they were not looking ahead. They were content to maintain their plantations. And that's why Brazil didn't maybe become as large of an economic powerhouse, because when their slavery ended, there wasn't really any forward-thinking behavior.
And back to, if we want to talk about England, you have to understand until the 1810, the British were like the largest slave traders.
Mike check.
If I may respond to these allegations,
You look at Barbados, Jamaica.
If you look at the
these are slave
history
colonies
of England, they're the country that gave their citizens more rights than what was really.
But they
existed
enslaved
anywhere else in the
Africans
world.
too.
Yeah, that's
They enslaved
the
Africans.
And as a
difference.
result of having this, they had the scientific
US
revolution, and then after this, they had the agricultural revolution, and that led to the industrial revolution.
And then they had
And it
a
came about
global. They had
because
slave
they
people in
empowered
India.
their-
That's right.
Now hold on. You guys have said a lot, and I feel that I should be able to say something in response. You would expect that Brazil, if this argument is correct, Brazil imported 6 times as many slaves as the United States, so you would expect that they would have been more successful. But let's look at today. If you were to go to Brazil or India or a place like that and give them advice on how to best strengthen their economy, would you actually go and tell them that you should enslave a
That is an
tenth of their
ignorant-ass
population?
argument.
No, see, that kind of slavery is outdated. Let me mic check. Let me get a word in edgewise here. Hold on. I haven't said shit this whole time. So I just want to mic check and put this all in perspective for us. So, Bridgman, what kind of phone do you have here?
I have an LG phone.
It's an LG phone. Do you guys see the that Guardian article I posted the other day?
About the Congolese and yes.
But yeah.
She's Guatemalan or something.
No, Mexican. So, yeah, in Mexico, LG factory. Some lady had a flat screen, building our flat screens, paid $400 a month, had her hands chopped off. They gave her less than a year's pay because she lost her fucking arms. At LG making our phones. So let's not act like slavery. Let's not get all moralistic and act like slavery is this thing of the past. The basic economic arrangement is still the same. We just pay them a little bit, barely enough to survive. So we don't have to supply the food. We don't have to supply the housing. Pay them just enough to survive. And then when they lose their arms, making our cheap shit.
We export our slavery elsewhere.
So acting like slavery is the thing of the past and moralizing and acting like we don't profit from it. I'm just saying.
Yeah, because we're still trying to get the labor as cheap as possible.
Are these countries
the reality.
well off?
Because that's a market incentive.
These countries that are engaging in what you...
No, but we are
These companies
are the countries that profit from it. Are they? Look, they don't profit from it. Mexican is exactly. Is LG a Mexican company?
Is LG a Mexican company?
But Mexican workers are being paid and they go to work and they want those factories to be there. They are benefiting from this as well.
But the question is,
Hey, the slave. I hear some people who said the slaves didn't have it half bad. They didn't mind. So I think it's kind of the same argument.
Missing out on here is that
You want to talk about freedom and rights and all this?
In order to create a powerful society, you have to create powerful
Virtual
individuals.
slaves?
And this may sound like a bit of a tautological argument. I feel it is. But the fact of the matter is that's how you get a powerful society, is from a powerful collection of people.
Excuse me, I want to go
on
back.
an individual level, if you want to make people powerful, then you empower them. You empower them with rights. You empower them with the ability to get patents.
Okay, I'm going to have to call you out on your bullshit.
You empower, hold on, Bridgemont. You empower them with the ability to get a mortgage, which African Americans historically in the United States were not allowed to. You empower them with an education, which again, African Americans were not given that.
And all that African American empowerment during the housing crisis a couple years ago.
This is how you create a strong economy. You do not enslave your workers or disenfranchise your workers.
You enslave them in other countries so you can profit off that.
You have a more powerful country when you allow people to.
Even though we're doing it to ourselves now.
You're talking as if slaves are citizens. You're slave is in a system where slavery operates. A slave is not considered a citizen, and your citizens are doing well, and these are property. And you talk so highly of England like they didn't colonize the whole damn world and enslave people in every colony they had, and they did not become rich off of that. It's so blatantly false.
So all right, so basically what we're
that's not what I'm complimenting. What I'm saying is, why did England become that powerful to begin with?
Because they enslaved the world.
The Industrial Revolution happened before they enslaved the world. So why did
they weren't the world power?
Okay, well let's hold on. Let's break it down.
Country was able to do what England did.
All right, look.
Reason for this, England was far more economically powerful.
Hold on.
They made themselves more powerful with trade, but they were able to do things no one else in Europe or in the world was able to do.
Yo, last thing I'm gonna say. Look,
it's a coincidence.
Joey, Jesus Christ.
No, I've been
I know, but I get your point, and I want to respond. So that's the thing. I get your point, and then you just keep repeating it. I get it. Let me respond real quick, and then you can respond. Look, like there are ants who enslave each other too, who haven't built. Look, the slavery isn't the only factor. Slavery isn't the only factor, so you can't act like slavery is the only. None of us can act like the only factor. But I think the point is that the free market, the natural incentives of a natural, just free market, are that you want labor as low as possible, and as low as possible is free. You can't get any lower than that.
No,
so there's a natural market incentive for slavery. I think we talked about that before, but I think that's the point.
That's absolutely not how it works. And
how is that?
And let me respond to that because you said I would be able to. If labor and capital are be able to work together on this, and they have to, then people, one of the most basic rights.
But they don't. Capital just tramples labor.
The right to choose who you work for. That is absolutely important. If your employer is not willing to pay you enough, then you can go and work somewhere else.
And if none of the employers,
well, exactly, it does depend on macroeconomic
This is very
options.
frustrating.
But the fact of the matter is that by having that allows for people to chase their talents and dreams. They can go and work for the people they want to work for. And if you're going to suggest to me that
so you can go to work for Burger King or McDonald's or Hardee's or
excuse me,
bullshit alert.
Excuse me. If you were going to suggest that the U.S. economy was better off 100 or 200 years ago because this country put a tenth of its population in chains and didn't allow African Americans to go and pursue.
No, we're better off exporting that. We ain't better off exporting that.
We're better off today because of the exploitation of black people 200 years ago.
We'd be much better off today if African Americans had not been enslaved, and I completely disagree.
I don't think it's the main factor, really, but I think it's
a contributing.
It's definitely a contributing.
This is important.
I think it's hard to say for sure, but
the needs of our economy have shifted. And one way or another, you're still having wage slavery. What I would like to see, maybe Brian can look at that since he's this research guy, is the difference in cost basis between owning 100 slaves in 1860 to inflation versus the wage slavery that we have now, for example, exporting it overseas to countries like Mexico and Guatemala. The thing about the slavery system in the American South, which is the one most people recognize with black people being enslaved by white owners, is that it was very expensive to maintain because you had to maintain a military force, you had to maintain a whole legal system, you had to maintain all these.
We've got drones
things,
now, we've got ankle bracelets, we've got GPS monitoring.
Slave catchers were.
Technology is going to make that very easy.
Who do you think paid slave catchers, Joe? I'm just using an example. Who do you think paid them? That was a very profitable profession.
Very rich, essentially Southern plutocracy.
So that's the thing, is that to actually maintain a slave labor force, it's still an expensive enterprise. You might not be paying them wages, but to support them, to keep them fit enough.
But if you can pay one person to keep 10 people from not running away and give him a gun, that's going to be cheaper than paying those 10 people.
It's cheaper, but it's not cheaper than exporting it to somebody else.
That's true. Someone else can do that. Yeah.
It's easier to export the overseer and have his slaves put it out.
One point that I don't want to be misunderstood on is that it's absolutely true that African Americans built a lot of this country. They worked incredibly hard, and the profits of what they did were stolen from them consistently for the first several hundred years that the colonies in the country existed. So I'm not arguing against that, but what I am arguing against is the notion that cheap labor is good for your economy, and that if you just have lots of cheap labor, that's going to help your economy out. That's quite orthogonal.
It's not going to be good for the economy. It's not good for the economy because what you consider the economy takes in wages as being high wages are good for the economy in the sense that more people in the economy are able to spend money, but it's not good for the economy, but it's good for corporations. It's good for the entity at the end of the day that has to pay less on labor.
Wouldn't you agree that a weakening middle class in the United States today is hurting our economy?
Because of how it's
Because the weakening middle class is meaning that we have more low-wage jobs.
But you know what?
You agree
I agree with that, but guess what? Wall Street is doing fine. The bankers are making more money than ever. People at the top of the pyramid are...
90% of income gain since the recession. You go to the top 1%.
You have to choose one of these two lanes here.
Actually, no, because wait a minute.
Or more low-wage jobs.
Go ahead, Brian, then I'll go.
Joey, because back in the 1800s, 1700s, we didn't have a consumer-based, service-based economy as we do today.
That's right.
So you can't compare apples and oranges in this way. It's a false dichotomy.
I actually can. Just because the things that we were selling were different does not change these basic notions.
This is what I think we disagree about consistently being on trade issues on this topic and other things. Is that your definition, Joey, of the economy is different than maybe mine or Bridgemon's. When you say the economy, you're taking...
He's looking at slaves as people, which they were not.
You're taking into account...
No, it's not disagreement.
Well, let me finish.
You call them workers.
I do want to hear Steen's point without him being interrupted.
You take it when you say the economy. You take into account quality of life, the functioning of your society, these other things that I don't. When you say economy to me, I don't take into account.
I'm thinking about profits.
You're right. You're right when you say that the middle class damaging is hurt society. But why does it hurt society? Because of quality of life. Because rank and file, real middle class Americans, meaning they're in the middle of the average American.
Joey, do you not realize that the economy can grow?
Thing that I'm arguing,
but all that growth or profit can go to a small portion of those people. I just want to make sure I'm
not being misunderstood. I'm saying that the GDP is smaller than it should be because we have a weak middle class.
But this is the thing. You're taking into account quality of life. You're taking into account the quality of society. You're taking.
It's actually not the argument I'm making. I'm talking about.
I mean, he might be right. I mean, in our type of economy, yeah, it is a consumer-based economy, really. I mean, just because there's so many more people than...
We've always, in a sense, been a consumer-based economy. What we're consuming has changed. But if you don't give people the ability to consume, it's difficult to have a strong economy, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I would go back. If you want to talk about, you want to talk about a strong economy and a slave-based system, I would go back to Nazi Germany. And the thing is about this is that nobody wants to admit this, but the German economy after Hitler took power was better than it was in most countries, including our own.
Because they fixed monetary policy, though.
They fixed monetary policy, but they also engaged in massive wealth redistribution based on the idea of slave labor. The Jews and many other groups had their property taken from them. They were in many cases, and later on they were put in concentration camps. They became slave laborers. They were forced to work in positions like maids at first that were degrading.
Yes, but I would never credit that with bringing the German economy back. I mean, they had a debased currency.
It did.
You can't act like free labor does not have an impact.
If we went out, let's just say...
but the impact is quite negative.
Let's just say
Why is China becoming a more powerful country today? Is it because they have more cheap labor, or is it because more of their cheap labor is moving...
the focus of their drive.
Excuse me, because more of that cheap labor is moving into the middle class, and more people in China are moving to middle class jobs. Is that not the case?
I guess they're
factories are leaving China now.
They're going to
consumer-based economy.
The policy of that is you think that's just an inevitable trend. That's going to happen forever. The middle class is always going to grow, and there's not going to be a point where we're like, okay, that's enough, and now we can keep the rest of you real poor, and we're going to have an economy that's going to function.
Why China is becoming a more powerful country is because they are becoming more middle class.
I think because they have a shit ton of people they can exploit.
Their economy is changing. It depends on whether you're an importer or an exporter.
Yes, and I just described those changes.
I mean, if they had like a billion slaves, do you think it'd be, would they have like a less productive economy or more?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm arguing. You cannot have a strong consumer-based economy.
I mean, if they were organized, if they had
your population,
you cannot
if they were
have
focused
a strong
on it, if they
furthermore,
and the thing is, this is also
wasn't cotton like the number one export in the world? I mean, like you just said you can't have a strong consumer-based economy off of slavery, and that's what
we do. LG, look at all our mentioned iPhones, man. Foxconn, come on, man.
If I may point this out on cotton, though, look at who the South was competing with on cotton. They were competing with India.
And
now we're competing.
Meanwhile, in the rest of the country, we were doing manufacturing and much more high quality stuff that was much more valuable. They weren't competing with India. They were competing with England and the best in the world. I want America to compete with the best in the world, not with India.
But what does that have to do with it?
Well,
it's about the type of economy that you have.
Well, you don't want a low-wage economy. That creates a weak economy.
Not necessarily. That's not always been proven to be the case.
Quite necessarily. It almost seems tautological to a point. If everybody is weak and poor in your economy,
I mean, it depends on how you judge the
overall country.
If they're not considered people, first and foremost, you get that. You need to get you're looking at slaves like workers. They have right. They're not. They're pieces of property. You need to equate them to machines. The machines don't get paid, so we don't have a weak economy. No, that's not the dichotomy
but
here.
Using people as machines is, from even just an economic perspective, is inefficient compared to using people as
well. When you don't have machines.
Yeah,
when you don't have machines, but.
I mean, nowadays we pay them like 25 cents an hour.
Well, can I just go back to the issue? Okay, first and foremost, if you look at what slavery did for Southern white Americans in terms of generational wealth, if you look at it from that perspective, if you look at it, the old families from the South who were able to, in the 1900s, invest their money into the railroads and invest their money into the banks and real estate and insurance. A lot of them, you look at Merrill Lynch, a lot of these companies on Wall Street now that are in Fortune 500, their genesis came off of families that were plantation owners.
I've already conceded to you that white people, several hundred rich white families who owned the slaves and the property back then did essentially steal all that wealth and all the profits from their slaves. But that still doesn't change everything else that I've been saying. I mean, stealing
worked for them.
Not create for a better economy.
In the later on, for your family, it does. If I steal
specific families that you're talking about.
If I steal $10 million today, 100 years from now, my family will have a head up.
Joey, how do you feel about reparations then?
Reparations. I think that the real issue
some kind of compensation for that.
It's rather interesting.
Everybody else gets it.
To which, if you let African Americans compete fairly with white people, it's interesting to look in the South. After the Civil War, by say the year 1900, the extent to which there was not a big difference in the living standards between whites and blacks, except from a legal perspective, and there were some whites that were very well off.
And how many rich black people were there?
Very few, but the typical African American and the typical white person in the South were not very different in economic standing until the beginning of the 20th century, and this is where reparations, I think, becomes an issue. Because in the beginning of the 20th century, the government rightly got more involved with making sure that people were more empowered, such as through things like education and mortgages. But who was it that got all the public education and mortgages? It wasn't until, I believe, 1916 that you had as many African Americans going to public schools as you did to private schools. And I think that really says something. If you were able to get a mortgage in Levittown, for instance, you could get it for a couple $100,000, for instance. In 30 years, it goes up 3 times in price. In the meantime, African Americans have not been allowed to move out of the inner city ghettos that they've been forced to stay in. So I actually think that the great inequity that we see today comes from the first half of the 20th century. And I do think that when people talk about reparations, I don't think that it is a radical notion to talk about when you consider that a group of people has been systematically repressed.
Okay, and I will just say, as far as reparations go, we would not need reparations as Lincoln set up what was known as the Freedmen's Bank. And this bank dissolved. And Frederick Douglass said the absolution of this bank was more detrimental to African Americans than 10 more years of slavery would have been. So I think that, if we're talking about some of the things like the 40 acres and the mule that nobody ever got. Or, at the same time when...
Did you guys know Bill O'Reilly was raised in Levittown?
Yeah. When the same time that slaves were being freed, white Americans in this country were taking advantage of homesteads out west. And African Americans were not able to take advantage of that same type of advantages. That's why you have a lot of families today, a lot of farmers today who are, who get a lot of these subsidies, got a lot of their land from their family in those homesteads.
But you think that America is better off today as a powerful country because we did these things to African Americans, right?
I believe that.
And I disagree with that.
I believe that America plays a significant stance in the situation the stance of where America is today. I think you can't look and say that 200 years of free labor is, not good for.
And Joey, here's what I would say. I would say there's
200 years of not developing the talents and the skills and the wealth bases of those people is actually much more tragic.
But you had. For years, you had the talent and the wealth of the intellectual capital was taken from so many African Americans and attributed to the master. The intellectual property of a slave is owned by its owner. Right. That's why you have a lot of people. Like you look at the cotton gin, it's attributed to Eli Whitney, but a slave came up with the initial idea because it had to be another way. A white man don't care about getting the seeds out the cotton. It's the slaves who got to go there and get their hands hurt that want to find a more efficient way to.
I think the main thing here, Joey. Like I don't know if you deny this or not, but on the free market, there's a natural incentive to pay people as low as possible. From the individual perspective, which is where it happens. I mean, because we don't collectively pay our people because we're not a socialist country, because we're a free market.
Would you like me to
free market? Yes, please.
I mean, businesses have an incentive to pay as low to their workers as possible, and workers have an incentive to get paid as much as possible. And so it's a constant
shit. But what's that mean? That means slaves have
slaves don't have the ability to negotiate on that.
It depends on
workers don't get to negotiate their whole environment.
This is the thing about capitalism is fine, but it's really like you said, there has to be a push-pull, and there has to be strong worker protection and worker rights in a capitalist society in order to have a healthy economy. The thing about the reparations is this. Reparations just really only works if it's first generation. Yeah. If it's, for example, the concentration camp victims that are paid checks by the German government, I don't know if it's every month or every year, but anybody who is a verified survivor of a concentration camp in Germany, they are paid money by the German government. So when they get out of those camps, the ones that survive were given a pension, as it were, for the reparations for what was done to them and everything. And in many cases, that money has helped them to live better lives and to start businesses and do different things.
We gave the Japanese reparations.
You see in many cases the success they've been able to come. Jewish Europeans and others have been able to be successful in many cases because of that. But the problem is that, if you're getting 3 or 4 generations down the line, it's like, well, prove your great-great-grandfather was enslaved.
And I agree that you should. I believe that if there's going to be any talk of reparations, I think it should be, you can't be like your mom is Jamaican or your dad is African.
Yeah, I think that's too hard.
You should get reparations based on.
I think it's too late.
Being a direct descendant from an African American slave.
So roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of people that are black in America that are not descendants of slaves because they're descendants of free blacks or they're descendants of immigrants. What about people that are half and half, for instance?
They would get half of.
And what about
estimate? It needs to be based on.
This is my suggestion.
It needs to be based on. And it can be proven. If you can put out, I mean, it's not hard to do.
But the reality is, if you want to give black people reparations basically because they had such a disadvantage basically 100 years ago, had no wealth at all. I mean, did any black people, even who weren't slaves, have any wealth at all 100 years ago? Weren't all black people at the same disadvantage?
It was white people too, but they had the right.
No, what I'm saying, weren't all black people, like even if they were here or not, weren't they all basically?
That's not true because there were free blacks who were.
There were probably some.
But no, but those families of free blacks, people who were free, you can see that they have the generational wealth, and it shows they're doing a lot better off than direct descendants of slaves. That's it's a documented evidence. You look at Henry Louis Gates, for instance. Henry Louis Gates, his family is descended from free blacks. And
I mean, is this just anecdotes or is this like statistical facts?
This is statistical facts.
All right. I'll take your word for it.
I'm just saying, if you've had opportunity to develop as a family to develop generational wealth since prior to the 1800s, you are better off today than somebody who has not had that same opportunity.
I agree. And America would be better off today if that had been allowed to happen.
First generation reparations works. After that, I just think it's too muddy, and you're better off looking forward and trying to create economic opportunity for general overall society and for specific groups rather than
Fuck that, Hillary Clinton 2016!